Wu-Tang solved music's biggest problem in 1993. Nobody was paying attention. In 2023, Taylor Swift re-recorded her entire catalog to reclaim ownership of her own music. The music industry called it revolutionary. Wu-Tang Clan did the structural equivalent 30 years ago. Nobody called it anything, because nobody was paying attention to what 9 kids from Staten Island were actually building. This isn't a story about hip-hop. This is a story about ownership architecture and why the music industry is still catching up to a blueprint drawn in '93. The structure nobody talks about. When RZA brought Wu-Tang Clan together, is still catching up to a blueprint drawn in '93. The structure nobody talks about. When RZA brought Wu-Tang Clan together, he negotiated something almost unheard of in the music business at that time. Each member retained the right to sign solo deals with other labels, while the collective Wu-Tang brand remained independently controlled. Think about what that means structurally. Universal, Sony, Warner. The major labels operate on a simple principle. You sign with us, we own you. Your name, your likeness, your sound, your catalog. The contract extracts everything. RZA said no to that model before most artists even understood the model existed. He essentially created a holding company with 9 partners, each with their own revenue streams, their own deals, their own creative sovereignty, while the collective brand appreciated separately above all of it. That's not a rap group. That's a decentralized business entity. And in 1993, nobody had language for what he was doing. They just called it Wu-Tang, the diversification nobody credits. Here's what gets left out of every Wu-Tang documentary. By the late 1990s, Wu-Tang had moved into clothing with Wu-Wear, one of the first artist-owned streetwear brands predating Rocawear, predating Sean John, predating every rapper-turned-fashion mogul story that came after. They moved into film production, into video games, into martial arts licensing, because RZA understood that the Wu-Tang brand wasn't just music. It was a fully extensible intellectual property system. Wu-Tang Financial was a real registered entity. The joke became a meme. The meme obscured the reality that RZA was thinking about financial infrastructure when his peers were thinking about album sales. Now fast forward to Once Upon a Time in Shaolin. One album, one physical copy, sold in 2015 to one buyer for $2 million. Most people remember the buyer, Martin Shkreli, the pharmaceutical executive who became a cultural villain. They remember the government seizure after his fraud conviction. They remember Pleasure Dow eventually purchasing it for $4 million. What most people missed is the underlying principle. Wu-Tang created artificial scarcity around a cultural asset before NFTs existed, before blockchain existed, before the entire conversation about digital ownership and cultural assets became mainstream. They were operating on concepts the broader market wouldn't understand for another decade. The problem they solved that nobody acknowledged. Here's the tension that should bother you. In 2024, artists are still fighting the same battles Wu-Tang structurally resolved in 1993. Taylor Swift fights for her masters. Wu-Tang never gave theirs up. Independent artists fight for royalty splits. RZA negotiated collective ownership with individual sovereignty from day one. Artists fight for brand extension rights. Wu-Tang built brand extensions before the label could contractually prevent it. The music industry didn't learn from Wu-Tang, it ignored Wu-Tang, and 30 years later, it's still having the same arguments. Why? Because Wu-Tang came from Staten Island, because they came from hip-hop, because the business press in 1993 wasn't looking at 9 black men from the projects and asking what they could teach the industry about intellectual property architecture. That is not an accident. That is a pattern, and it connects directly to something Black Wall Street odds exist to examine: the systematic failure to recognize, document, and build on black economic innovation when it emerges outside expected contexts. Wu-Tang didn't just make great music. They built a model, a replicable, scalable, structurally sound model for artist ownership in the modern entertainment economy. The question Black Wall Street odds is asking is simple. What would that model look like today? Built with blockchain royalty splits, direct fan investment platforms, AI-managed licensing, and the legal infrastructure that now exists to protect it, because the blueprint existed in Staten Island in 1993. Wu-Tang Clan ain't nothing to play with. That line was never just about attitude. It was a terms of service agreement. To go deeper on the ownership economics behind Wu-Tang, the cultural asset trust framework, and what a modern version of this model could look like for black artists and investors, the full analysis and community discussion is at BWO's forum, link in the description.